Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video view series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the level 1 adventure Gloria's Gambit, designed by Hyatt for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick R, Andy, Chris, Manuel, Basil, Nick C, and Travis. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Nima, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean A.K., Cert 2B, Adam, Dead as a Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, and Fatboy619. Thank you all very much for your support. So this is a level 1 adventure. It is part of a bigger campaign by the designer called Orbs of the Plains, which apparently spans 40 adventures going all the way up to level 20. I'm not sure if they're all on the DM's Guild at the moment or not, but you could very easily play this as just its own separate level 1 adventure. There are actually notes, which is kind of nice the way it's presented, in the specific purple sidebars. If you wanted to play it as part of this larger campaign, there are certain story seeds and teases and other elements you can include, but if you're not, then you don't have to worry about it, and it serves as just a fine adventure on its own. I really like the adventure design itself, especially how it starts and the dungeon that you are provided with. And it does use a lot of well-worn, low tier 1 tropes. There's goblins, there's bandits, there's a tomb, there's treasure. And one thing I like that it does use is the concept of the accompanying NPC as a storytelling device as part of the dungeon. And in this case, the NPC is kind of luring the party into this dungeon for their own nefarious purposes. So the backstory here, which is all described in Part 1, which is kind of a weird way it's organized, but Part 1 is just entirely background information for the DM. The adventure actually starts in Part 2, which is basically Act 1. And then parts 3 and 4 part 3 is the main dungeon where the whole most of the adventure takes place, and then part 4 is the Bandit Camp, which is very small and almost inconsequential. But the backstory is there's this group of bandits called the Notch Blades, which is cool, led by 2 siblings, Glorian and Gloria, and they waylay a dwarf who has a map, and that map leads to an old mine that has since been exhausted and turned into a tomb for the dwarf that was running the mine, and is now occupied by goblins and, of course, full of treasure, because the goblins, being stupid, never did find the actual tomb with all the treasure in it. So the bandits go in there, and they are basically defeated by the goblins. The sister falls into a trap, but she manages to escape because the water pit that she falls into actually has an underground tunnel. You can pop out at the well at the entrance, so she escapes. The brother, however, is captured. Both of them think the other one ends up getting killed. The sister ends up assuming control of the bandits, the surviving bandits at least, like half of them were killed. And then her plan is to get a bunch of adventurers to lure them into the dungeon and have them basically do all the work, and then she ambushes them with the surviving bandits, which is a neat story hook, I think. I mean, not so much a story hook, because the players are hopefully just convinced to basically go on this adventure, but it's a neat concept to introduce this added complication where this person who does want to go into the dungeon and loot it also has her own plans for basically double-crossing the party. But unbeknownst to everybody, the brother is still alive and actually captured by the goblin tribe. So that's another interesting complication that arises. And there are, thankfully, ways for the players to figure out that she is not who she says she is. There's like wanted posters around for the brother who has a very similar name and a similar look, and people can start asking questions. Weirdly enough, I don't think there's ever a chance for the party to actually roll insight on her, which is bizarre. I mean, surely that would be part of the first thing my party would do would be start rolling insight on her. And there doesn't seem to be that, and that is odd because the adventure does a very good job of including a ton of skill checks. And what I really like, it uses a lot of, I think that's called scaling skill checks, where the information that you, especially if it's an information-based skill check, it's like a religion or a perception or investigation, something where you're just not trying to like avoid damage or something, but you're just trying to learn about something, then a scaling skill check is very, very nice. And what that means is the better you roll, the more information you can get. And we get a lot of these throughout the entire adventure, multiple scaling skill checks, which I think is really, really cool. So the idea is she leads the adventurers to this dungeon. She triggers the water trap herself, knowing that she can survive it and knows where the hidden escape hatch is. So she goes first if she can. All of this, the problem with designing a lot of these adventures with specific story beats is it's always with the asterisk of, if you can pull it off, because you're not the only one telling the story. The players are there, they're part of the adventure, and do they allow all of these things to happen? Are they still trusting her at that point? Do they trust her to lead them? All of these different complications. And I do appreciate that the adventure seems to understand that and includes notes like, if they investigate the well too much, then she's going to be really upset about that because the well is the escape hatch. So, and she knows that the rope has to be down there in the well for her to escape. So if they pull up the bucket and leave it there, then she will drop it in there and be like, no, it's good luck to leave the bucket in there or some bullshit, So there's different ways for the party to realize that she's not in the up and up. And but the adventure still basically continues regardless, which is good. So even if they determine, they could even arrest her back in town if they wanted to, but still go to the dungeon, and then they're falling into the water pit trap. They're dealing with everything. They can rescue the brother. It still continues along. So that's the important caveat here, is even though there is some important story moments, and hopefully you can get them off because I think it's satisfying, even if you don't, and the party is extremely suspicious and doesn't necessarily want to work with her, that doesn't screw the adventure up. And as a DM, you don't feel like you have to railroad the party in doing that. In fact, they can even get the information about, if they really want to give her the third degree, they can find out where the bandits are camped and actually do part 4 first before part 3, and the adventure just totally lets that happen. It's that's no big deal. You can take out the bandits, then you don't have any complications after the dungeon. So that part's really good. I also really, really like this dungeon design in general. Part 3, Thorolf's Mine. We're level 1. You don't want dungeons to be too big or too long or too complex. That being said, I think this is a really interesting dungeon design. There's a lot of good stuff going. It's got a great opening moment where you go down this hallway and you drop into that water pit trap, and immediately on the other end of the hallway you can see barricades and goblins firing arrows. So, if a party member drops down there, then you're down a party member while these goblin arrows are shooting at you. And then they're setting off the alarm. They open a gate and a bunch of rust monsters come out to attack. The goblins cover themselves and their weapons and armor in this chalk, which the party can find in a nearby cavern. And the chalk renders the goblins immune to the rust monsters' abilities. So that's a clever thing that, as the DM, you're definitely supposed to be very forward about explaining how the goblins look all chalked up, and it's very odd, and then the PCs can infer from that what that means and how they can counteract the rust monster. So I think that's a really cool twist. And again, if they had investigated the chalk in an earlier cavern, they could have found out this information. So they're battling orcs or goblins along the way, and eventually they get to the boss battle, which is this orc leader, and there's that really classic fun scene where I don't know why he's about to hang this bandit leader. I don't know how much time is supposed to be between when they were captured or not, but D&D, it's always the best to me it's always the time is the right time. I don't really care about elapsed time. You're like, oh no, he was dead, you took too long. No, this is the cool moment that's going to happen. You show up in the boss battle and he kicks the stool out from the bandit leader who's being hung, and of course you've got 4 rounds to save him if you want to save him or not, or there's a good reward for turning him in, so you could use him as an NPC ally in the dungeon. There's a lot of cool story things you could do there. The problem is the adventure seemingly forgets about its sibling bandit leaders at this point, which is a huge bummer because it's set up all these cool complications and story beats with the sister leading the bandits and trying to trick the PCs and the brother being captured. There are, for example, no scenes between the brother and sister who each think the other one is dead from their initial assault on this tomb. And there's no real epilogue sequence between, does she show up with a bunch of bandits? How does that work? And what are the different ways? If the sister pulls off this ruse 100%, what is her ultimate plan? Is it to, attack them at the entrance? Is it to, wait at the right moment? Do they go back to the bandit camp and and kind of replan how to do things. There's not really any notes on that, which is hugely disappointing because I think the adventure did such a good job in the first half of the adventure to dictate all the different ways the story could go and how to include the sister in all these different events and everything. And then all of a sudden, once they get past that part where she basically triggers the trap, falls down, and escapes, there's really no more notes after that. It's kind of just a standard dungeon crawl. And even when they get the brother, the only real notes are you can either turn him in. He is currently unarmed and stripped of his armor. He's down to only 15 hit points. You could use him as a trap patsy, is what the designer calls it. But then he is basically tries to like pass out, and he's very wanting to work with the party members at that point. But the only notes here are it's just how the PCs react to Glorian's revelation that he saw his sister fall down the water trap should produce an interesting role-playing moment. Well, no duh. But then it just says after a day, she and her 4 bandits enter to find out if the party got Thorup's treasure. That's only if the PCs end up not coming out of the mine. So it does determine that she... So is she supposed to go back to the... I don't know. So I was lost on how that exactly transpired, and I was disappointed there wasn't... What there needed to be was a firm epilogue sequence that explained, if this happens, then this happens. If Gloria got off her ruse and she escaped, then here's what happens. If she doesn't, but she's still part of the party, here's what happens. If she was killed, here's what happens. If Glorian finds out, if Glorian survives, here's what happens. There needed to be a real breakdown of events here for me as the DM to try to figure out how does this all work into a satisfying conclusion, because right now there really isn't one, and it's a bummer because I think it started off so well. There's a really funny kind of... I guess the climax is the boss fight, but also that's not even the tomb. Once they find the secret door into the tomb, there's this giant beer trap. That's another pit trap, but it's gigantic. The whole floor opens out into this giant pool of beer with barrels floating in it, and the players basically have to hop from barrel to barrel. And if they even touch the beer, they gain levels of exhaustion because it's all magical beer foam stuff. So I thought that was an interesting way to do a climax end to a dungeon via a non-hostile trap, if that makes sense. It's just like an environmental hazard, so that was pretty interesting. They get a huge loot haul at the end, and keep in mind, this is all level 1, so to me, you don't ever want level 1 to last more than like 2 sessions, I don't think, 1 or 2 sessions, and this one feels like this adventure alone that dungeon alone could be easily 2 sessions, and then there's more than that. You've got the first little bit with talking to Gloria and all that, and then there's also this bit at the Bandits Camp, where you go and find the surviving bandits. I think there's, I want to say 6 or 8 of them or so. And oddly enough, I don't even think Gloria is normally here, and it just seems very anticlimactic and odd that you basically come in, kill a few bandits, and that's basically it. There's no real story advancement. There's no good treasure here. It's almost like you might as well not have this and just have the bandits waiting outside of the dungeon somewhere, and then, depending on if the player has figured it out or not, determines if they can come out and be ready for the bandits versus the bandits get to ambush the party as they come out of this dungeon. So I thought the Bandits Camp was definitely a misstep there. Unless, again, there was some kind of cool epilogue moment where it's like, if Gloria maybe survives but realizes the party figured her out, then she goes back to regroup and just hunkers down at the camp for a night. This could have been used in some more interesting ways, but I don't think, as written, it actually is. And then the loot at the end is insane for level 1, by the way. You get 1,500 gold, multiple spell scrolls, multiple potions of giant strength, multiple +1 items. Holy crap, that is a lot for level 1. Now, granted, that's a pretty big dungeon, and it gets bigger because this product has what I can only describe as, like, free DLC, to use a video game term. This is Gloria's Gambit : Dungeon Edition, which is also a video game thing to do, which is an expansion of the Thorup's Mine dungeon. So the dungeon, as you can see, which, by the way, there are not bigger maps than this. This is a major complaint of mine. The layout in general is a complaint, which I haven't even gone over because I wanted to cover the content first, because I do think the content adventure is very, very good. The layout is not, however, and a big reason for that is that these maps we get, which are, obviously not the full color, nice art maps that I like, but they are decent grid maps, and they've got good notes and things, but literally this is all we get. We get this little 25% page size embedded map. There's no separate map picture file at all. I don't know why you would throw together, not even throw together, craft a relatively good-looking map here. Not something I would necessarily want to immediately plop into Roll20 or something like that. I need some better tiles. But still, it's better than just a, thrown together map. And then reduce it to this size and have it embedded in the text to where I can't even really see what's going on. That is a huge misstep. So that's a big, big bummer. But as you can see, kind of, if you squint in, this is the main... This is the entire dungeon, and then there's this little arrow pointing to the right here, and that's what leads to this whole expansion section, which is a completely separate quest. So we are completely divorced from the whole siblings, the bandits. It is still part of the goblin stuff that's going on, I guess, but this is very much a post-launch DLC where it's just a separate quest. And the party could leave to go back to town, essentially complete the quest of the bandits and siblings and all that stuff in the tomb, and then they gain this new quest of hey, there's this bridge, we're afraid of another goblin incursion, there's a giant stone bridge over a chasm deep in this mine that we've discovered, can you please shut this down? And there is a magical scroll in here that used to belong to one of the dwarves, a disintegrate spell scroll that anybody can use to destroy this bridge, and that's the quest. Otherwise, the players could just go down that path and explore it, which would be interesting if you just left that open. Although, now, I think there's some good content in here. Granted, you lose all the good story stuff from the first one, even though that one ended up not having much of a conclusion, but still, you don't have any kind of good story hooks here. It's just you kind of go in and do a bunch of combat fights. But the combat scenarios are interesting. There's a lot of exploration. The actual climax where you're disintegrating the bridge as a bunch of drow are coming over and you've got a certain amount of rounds you have to do it with depending on the skill check you made. All of that is very well done, but that's a lot to throw at level 1 PCs, and you're not supposed to, from what I can tell, level up at all, because if you look at the first couple adventures that the designer has lined up for their campaign, you're level 1 even for the next adventure. Like, that's crazy. Like, level 1 D&D is not fun. Like, you have to craft things very, very carefully. And I think this dungeon is very well designed, but it's a lot of dungeon. And already we had a pretty good-sized adventure for level 1. Adding this expansion is probably too much dungeon for just level 1 PCs. If I were running this separate from this campaign, then I think you would have to level them up at some point in the middle of this adventure. And usually I don't even like necessarily adventures that say, okay, and then they level up at this point halfway through the dungeon and they keep going. I like them to be like, this is a level 7 adventure, this is a level 9 adventure, whatever. But in the case of a level 1, you kind of need that because level 1 sucks. And it's a bit much. Now, I do like the content in here. There's some interesting battles. There's some myconids in a cave. There's some giant fire beetles with a queen that you use the Ankeg stat block for. And then there's stairs that go down into this area with this huge chasm bridge. You find the spell scroll and a skeleton. The bizarre thing is it teases this demon that's chained up that the goblins actually used, which I guess that I don't give goblins enough credit, but I didn't know they would be able to have a demon ally, brand it so it can't be banished, and then construct runes to then contain said demon. That's asking a lot of goblins, but maybe some goblins could do that. The disappointing thing is they tease this demon the whole time, and then they don't even really introduce it. It is here included in the adventure, but it's a 17th level demon. It's chained up, and the spell scroll the players need are at the top rim of this pit. They're not even down in the 50-foot pit, so you can just ignore the demon completely. I was at least hoping after all of this that stealing the spell scroll off the corpse would at least involve like a stealth check or something to make it a little more tense, but instead it doesn't really matter. You just kind of grab it and get out without ever having to mess with the demon. But I do like the climax with the bridge and the drow marching over and having to survive a couple amount of rounds. There's a lot of good scaling skill checks in here. So it's got the expansion dungeon has interesting, cool content. There's some good exploration. There's some good combat. It definitely lacks in the storytelling compared to the rest of the dungeon, but it very much feels like free DLC in that case. Like, it's just more of this dungeon, and I do like the design, but I think it's also asking a lot of level 1 PCs to spend this many sessions at level 1. They don't have that many options or going down all the time. It feels like a bit much. Presentation-wise is my big hang-up here, which I'll go into with the pros and cons. But as you can see, it's a lot of very big blocks of text, walls of text, really. There needed to be more paragraph breaks, for sure. This is not very easy to read or decipher, and the art, which I'm glad there's art embedded throughout, and the maps look like they could be pretty solid, but all the art is very, very tiny compared to the text. Don't be afraid to make big-ass art that's, takes up entire pages or half pages or something. It's just there's too many words as it is. They need to be broken up, and the art needed to be better. So I'm including all of that as an overall, the presentation and layout needed some work for sure. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Gloria's Gambit. Pros, interesting. Excuse me. I choke on my words. Interesting NPCs with clever story twists. I like the sibling leaders. Gloria and Gloria, it's a very cool story hook. They seem like they have some fun motivations. I just like that whole story concept. Pros, scaling skill checks. As I mentioned, those are used throughout the adventure in multiple ways. I really like it when adventurers use that because I think it does make it interesting and rewards players for actually, instead of being just a pass-fail, but actually rewards them for rolling those really insanely high numbers. Pros, excellent low-level dungeon design. Thorolf's Mine is very well done. Even discounting the optional dungeon, I think there's a good balance of traps and monsters and role-playing and all the good things that we like. Pros, optional expanded dungeon. I think that's a total pro. Even though it lacks the storytelling, first of all, it's completely optional. You can seal that edge off or not. And second, I do think it's got some good combat and exploration bits in there, so it is well worth exploring if you don't mind keeping your PCs at level 1, or just level them up to level 2 and let them go to town. Cons, maps are tiny and embedded in the text. I don't know why on earth the designer would do that when they seemingly made some pretty solid maps. Granted, I would still probably have I don't know if I would complain about these maps or not. They actually are pretty good looking other than the white graph, plain floors. But honestly, there is color on here. It's well annotated. Like, if I were given this map and a separate player map at a full page size, I don't think I would actually have a complaint about it. But as it is, if I just have this, that's a big thumbs down. Cons, unattractive layout. I'm just including all of the fact that we get these giant blocks of text as well as teeny tiny art as just not the most well presented product, which I like that it does its own thing. It's got these cute little barrels on the bottom. It's got the nice, the text looks good on the background. The headings look good. The sidebars. There is stuff that I like about it. It's not a complete disaster. And the actual grammar and content and writing is very, very good, but it needed more paragraph breaks. This is way too much of a wall of text, and I wanted that art to be just embedded better. And cons, the one big story con I have, the structure con, is the epilogue. There's just not a good, satisfying ending to the things that the adventure laid out, which is mainly the tale of these two siblings trying to steal the content of this tomb and enrolling these adventurers to help them. They have all these, complications involved, and then there's no good epilogue about, how they interact with each other or interact with the party, depending on all the decisions that were made. So I think there was a big misstep there, and it's a bummer because it started out so strongly. Final verdict, Gloria's Gambit features a well-designed low-level dungeon crawl and interesting story hooks, though fails to end with a satisfying conclusion. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.